The night I realized my wife was lying to me. She kissed me on the cheek, adjusted her diamond earrings in the hallway mirror, and told me not to wait up. That was how it started. Not with a scream, not with some dramatic confession, not with lipstick on a collar or a stranger's perfume drifting through the house. It started quietly, almost politely, in the soft yellow light of our kitchen, with Natalie smoothing the front of her navy dress like she was heading into any other Thursday night. She said there was a late leadership dinner at the office. She said the regional team was in town. She said her phone might die. Then she smiled, picked up her car keys, and walked out the front door like 20 years of marriage could be tucked neatly behind her shoulder. I stood there for a moment with my coffee turning cold in my hand, listening to the silence she left behind. It was strange what I noticed first. Not fear, not anger, precision, the kind that comes right before a storm. Natalie had always been careful, but lately she had become polished in a way that felt rehearsed. New dresses for ordinary meetings. Late calls taken on the back patio. Her phone face down at dinner. Tiny changes. Almost invisible. But marriage, real marriage, teaches you the difference between a habit and a performance. And Natalie had started performing. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. That stress could turn warmth into distance. That success could make a person distracted. She was 40, a senior operations manager at a fast-growing logistics company outside Chicago, and everyone seemed to need something from her all the time. I wanted to be the husband who understood pressure, not the man who panicked over shadows. So I ignored the little things. The shorter replies. The absent stare. The way she looked through me instead of at me when I spoke. But then came the company dinner invite I was supposedly not meant to attend. One of Natalie's colleagues, a decent guy named Mark, mentioned it by accident when he ran into me at the grocery store on Tuesday night. He asked if I'd be there Thursday. I told him Natalie said it was internal leadership only. He paused just long enough for the truth to leave a mark. Huh, he said, looking down at his cart. I thought spouses were welcome. He moved on quickly after that, but I didn't. That 1 second sat in my chest all week like a thumb pressed against a bruise. By Thursday afternoon, I had already checked the event page, found the venue, and confirmed the reservation under her company name. 8 o'clock. Private dining room. Downtown. I told myself I was going there to clear up a misunderstanding. I told myself there would be some easy explanation, some harmless detail that would make me feel foolish for doubting her. But deep down, beneath every excuse, a colder thought had already taken shape. Maybe I wasn't going to discover whether my wife was lying. Maybe I was going to discover how long she'd been doing it. And when I finally pulled into the restaurant parking garage just before 8, I saw Natalie's car in the far corner, parked beneath the dim concrete lights, and for the first time all night, I stopped pretending I was still hoping to be wrong. By the time I stepped out of the elevator and into the restaurant lobby, I already knew 2 things. First, Natalie had lied to me. Second, whatever I was about to see would not be the kind of thing a husband ever forgets. The hostess smiled and asked for my name, but I did not answer right away. I stood there for a second, looking past her toward the glass doors that led into the private dining room, listening to the faint rise and fall of laughter behind them. It was warm inside, polished and expensive, the kind of place with low amber lighting, dark wood walls, and wine glasses that caught the light like tiny mirrors. Everything looked beautiful. That made it worse. I gave the hostess my name and said I was joining the Walker party. She checked the screen, then looked up with a small polite nod. They are already seated, she said. Of course they were. Natalie was never late for anything that mattered to her. I followed the hostess halfway down the hall, then stopped before we reached the door and told her I could find it myself. She smiled again and left me there alone. I do not know how long I stood outside that room. Maybe 3 seconds. Maybe 10. Long enough to hear Natalie laugh. Long enough to know it was real. Not the tired little laugh she gave me lately when I tried to lighten the mood at dinner. Not the distracted one she used on phone calls. This one was full. Easy. Bright. The laugh of a woman who had forgotten herself because she felt completely alive in someone else's company. I moved closer to the narrow opening between the door and the frame and looked inside. There were maybe 12 people around the long table. Men in sport coats. Women in fitted dresses and office smiles. Half-empty water glasses. Folded linen napkins. Plates already cleared from the first course. And there she was. Natalie sat halfway down the table in the deep blue dress she had modeled in our hallway mirror less than an hour earlier. Her hair was down. Her posture was relaxed. Her face looked younger somehow, softened by a kind of excitement I had not seen directed at me in a very long time. She was not sitting next to the vice president from out of town. She was not near the senior staff she had mentioned. She was sitting beside Jason Reed, 27 years old, ambitious, sharp jawline, new to the company, the kind of young man who still believed every room was waiting for him. I knew who he was because Natalie had mentioned him before, usually with that careful tone people use when they're trying to sound casual about someone they notice too much. Jason is smart. Jason handled the client call. Jason has potential. I had never thought much of it. Now I watched her lean toward him as he spoke, her hand resting near his sleeve, her expression open in a way that made my stomach tighten. There was nothing explicit in the moment, nothing anyone could point to and call proof. That was the cruel genius of it. If I had walked in right then and accused her, she could have smiled that cool smile and made me sound insecure, dramatic, unfair. But truth does not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in body language, in timing, in the private rhythm between two people who have already stepped across a line long before anyone else can see it. Then Jason said something I could not hear, and Natalie reached for her glass, looking down as she smiled to herself. It was a shy smile, a private smile. A woman does not smile like that for a colleague. Not after 20 years of marriage to a man waiting at home with cold coffee and questions he is still too loyal to ask out loud. I should have walked in. I should have confronted her right there, under the soft lights and the polished ceilings, with every face at that table turning toward us. But anger was not the strongest thing I felt in that moment. Clarity was. Cold, hard clarity. Because the second I saw her with him, I understood something that changed everything. This was not a mistake, not a passing phase, not work stress. Natalie had not drifted away from me. She had chosen a different version of herself, and she had done it while still coming home to my name, my house, my life, as if I were too blind to notice the difference. I did not go inside. I did not make a scene. I did not give Natalie the kind of chaos she could later twist into a story about my jealousy or insecurity. Instead, I stepped back from the door, walked the length of the quiet hallway, and took the elevator down to the parking garage with the strange calm of a man whose worst fear had finally put on a face. The concrete air felt colder down there. I stood beside my car for a full minute, staring at the dim reflection of myself in the driver's side window, and realized something that frightened me more than what I had just seen. I was not shocked anymore. Some part of me had been preparing for this for weeks, maybe longer. That was the truth I hated most. I had already been living in the shadow of her betrayal before I ever saw proof of it. On the drive home, downtown Chicago blurred past in long bands of white and red light. The radio stayed off. My phone buzzed once in the cup holder, probably some harmless app notification, but I ignored it. My hands stayed steady on the wheel. My breathing stayed even. If someone had looked over at me from the next lane, they would have seen an ordinary man heading home after an ordinary night. They would not have seen the quiet collapse happening inch by inch behind my ribs. When I got back to the house, everything looked exactly the same. The porch light was still on. The dish towel Natalie had folded that morning still hung over the oven handle. Her coffee mug was still in the sink from breakfast, lipstick faint on the rim. That nearly broke me. Not because of the mug itself, but because of what it meant. She had gone from our kitchen to that private room without hesitating, without guilt heavy enough to slow her down. Without enough respect for me to even invent a better lie. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the counter in the same place where she had kissed my cheek a few hours earlier. The house made small sounds around me, the refrigerator humming, the air vent shifting, the old wood settling into the night. For years, those sounds had felt like home. That night they felt like witnesses. I tried to replay the last 6 months with honesty. Not the way a loyal husband remembers, smoothing over the sharp edges, but the way an investigator would. Dates, changes, patterns. Natalie protecting her phone with a new passcode after years of not bothering. Extra gym visits that somehow never made her calmer. Work dinners that left her energized instead of drained. New perfume, better shoes, a brighter face when she thought I was not looking. Then there were the smaller things, the ones that seemed almost too petty to matter until they all stood together in a line. She had stopped asking how my day went unless she needed filler conversation. She had stopped finishing stories she started. She had started correcting me in front of people, lightly, casually, with a smile sharp enough to pass for charm. And 2 weeks earlier, when I reached for her hand in the grocery store parking lot, she had adjusted her purse instead, as if she had not seen it. I remembered all of it now. Every omission, every chill in her voice, every polished little dismissal. And somewhere between midnight and 1 in the morning, sitting alone at the kitchen table under the low pendant light, I finally said the words out loud. She thinks I do not know. Hearing it made the room go still. Because that was the real shift, not the dinner, not Jason, not even the lie. It was the arrogance beneath it all. Natalie believed she could rewrite our marriage while I kept playing my role in it. She believed she could become a stranger and I would keep calling it stress. She believed I was too devoted, too predictable, too easy to fool. I should have been furious. I was, in a way. But anger still was not the clearest feeling. What I felt most was insulted. Deeply, personally insulted. Not just by the betrayal, but by the assumption that I would never see it clearly enough to act. At 1:23 in the morning, headlights swept across the front windows. A car door shut outside. Natalie was home. I stayed seated at the table and looked toward the dark hallway as her heels clicked across the entryway tile. I heard her set down her purse. I heard the small pause she always took to kick off her shoes. Then her voice floated toward the kitchen, smooth and easy and perfectly controlled. "You are still up?" I looked at the glass of water in my hand, listened to the soft confidence in her tone, and understood that whatever happened next would not be decided by what she had done tonight. It would be decided by whether I let her keep believing I was the last person in the room to understand my own life. "I am fine," I told her, and that was the first lie I gave back. Natalie stepped into the kitchen like nothing had happened, one hand sliding her phone onto the counter, the other reaching for a bottle of sparkling water from the refrigerator. She looked composed. Fresh lipstick. Steady eyes. No sign of guilt anywhere on her face. That was what unsettled me most. Not that she could lie, but that she could do it gracefully. She twisted the cap, took a small sip, and leaned against the counter across from me. "The dinner ran long," she said. "You know how these things are." I nodded once, slow and neutral, as if I were too tired to care. "Yes," I said. "I guess I do." Then I stood, set my glass in the sink, and kissed her lightly on the forehead. That seemed to surprise her. For a split second, I saw her studying me, checking for cracks, checking for suspicion, checking to see whether the ground beneath her feet was still solid. I gave her nothing. "I am going to bed," I said. "Do not stay up too late." She smiled, small and relieved, and that was the moment I made my decision. I was not going to confront her until I knew everything. Not enough to be hurt. Not enough to be angry. Everything. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and made coffee in the dark. Chicago was still half asleep outside the kitchen window, the street washed in blue-gray light, the world quiet enough to hear my own thoughts clearly. Natalie came downstairs around 6:30 in a cream blouse and black slacks, moving with the efficient rhythm of a woman who had mastered the art of looking put together even when the truth around her was not. She glanced at me, smiled, and asked if I wanted anything from the bakery near her office. Same tone, same ease, same performance. I told her no. I watched her leave. Then I sat at the dining table with my laptop open and began building a timeline. It started with dates I already remembered. The first late dinner. The first weekend conference that suddenly did not allow spouses. The first time she changed her phone passcode. The first time she forgot a story she had told because the lie underneath it had shifted. Once I began, the details came faster than I expected. Calendar entries. Credit card charges. Gas station stops that made no sense for her commute. Parking receipts from neighborhoods nowhere near her office. None of it was enough on its own. Together, it began to hum with meaning. I created a folder on my computer and named it Taxes, the kind of boring title no one would ever open twice. Inside it, I made subfolders by month. Then by week. I saved screenshots of statements. I highlighted odd purchases. I searched old emails for references to overnight meetings and company events. A pattern surfaced almost immediately. Natalie's lies were not random. They had structure. They repeated. Tuesdays and Thursdays stretched later than they used to. Certain Saturdays came with volunteer excuses or last-minute strategic planning sessions. There was a hotel charge from a boutique property downtown 3 weeks earlier, disguised inside a larger corporate expense block. There were rideshare entries on nights she had supposedly driven herself. There were lunch receipts for two at places no busy manager would choose for a rushed work break. By noon, I had pages of notes and a pulse that never quite settled. But data alone was not enough. Facts could still be argued. Context could still be twisted. I needed certainty with edges. So that afternoon, I drove past Natalie's office building and parked across the street where I could see the employee garage entrance without being obvious. I felt ridiculous for the first 10 minutes. Then Jason Reed's car pulled in at 2:17. I recognized it from the company dinner valet line. A silver Audi sedan too polished for a man his age unless he cared deeply about appearances. Natalie's black SUV arrived 4 minutes later. She usually parked on the upper levels, but that day she followed him down the lower ramp without hesitation, close enough that anyone watching would know they had arrived together or planned to. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, my jaw locked, my eyes fixed on the concrete mouth of that garage, and felt the last traces of doubt leave my body like warmth escaping a room. They were not being reckless because they were in love. They were being reckless because they thought they were smarter than consequences. When I got home that evening, I moved through the house as if nothing had changed, but inside me, something had. The wounded husband was still there. So was the man who wanted answers. But now another version of me had entered the room. Colder, sharper, patient. And for the first time since this started, I was not waiting for Natalie to tell me the truth. I was preparing to prove that she never intended to. By the end of the week, I understood something ugly about betrayal. It was never just one lie. It was an architecture, a system, 1,000 polished little choices stacked so neatly on top of each other that by the time the truth appeared, it looked almost elegant. Natalie was not improvising. She was managing. That was who she had always been, even at work. Efficient, controlled, 2 steps ahead. The same instincts that made her successful in boardrooms were now being used to keep me in the dark. Once I saw that, I stopped thinking like a husband and started thinking like someone auditing a fraud. Every morning after she left, I sat at the dining table with my laptop, a legal pad, and a cup of black coffee that usually went cold before I noticed. I mapped out her movements against receipts, work calendars, and location tags buried in shared accounts she had forgotten were still linked. I did not need to hack anything. I did not need to do anything dramatic. Natalie had built her new life on the assumption that I would never look closely. All I had to do was look. I found recurring gaps in her schedule, narrow windows between meetings that were too long for lunch and too short for official travel. I found expenses that had been rounded in ways people use when they do not want numbers remembered clearly. I found 2 weekday afternoons when her company badge was not used at the office garage exit, even though she claimed to have stayed late. Then I found something better than suspicion. I found overlap. Jason had a public-facing professional profile full of speaking engagements, networking breakfasts, and young leadership panels. Most of it was harmless. But 3 times, his listed events placed him within a few miles of the same neighborhoods where Natalie's card had been used within the same hour. Downtown once. River North twice. One of those charges was for valet parking at a hotel lounge on a Thursday at 4:48 in the afternoon. Natalie told me that night she had been stuck in a budget review until 7. I stared at that line item for a long time. $42 for valet. $18 for coffee and pastries. A lie priced out to the cent Friday night. She came home in a bright mood, dropped her heels by the stairs, and asked whether I wanted to go to dinner the next day. For a second, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the timing was so perfect it felt scripted. A mercy dinner. A maintenance dinner. Just enough warmth to keep the marriage machine running. I looked at her across the kitchen island, at the woman who knew exactly how much attention to give and exactly when to give it, and I said yes. We went to a steakhouse in Oak Brook on Saturday, and anyone watching us would have thought we were fine. Natalie ordered a glass of Cabernet. I ordered iced tea because I wanted my mind clear. She talked about staffing. Issues, office politics, a delayed rollout, a woman in finance who kept missing deadlines. She wore her wedding ring. She smiled at the waiter. She touched my wrist once when she laughed. It was an astonishing performance, and maybe the most painful part was how familiar it felt. This was the version of marriage she was still willing to maintain. Not intimacy. Not honesty. Optics. Halfway through dinner, her phone lit up on the table beside her plate. She did not pick it up, but her eyes flicked down too fast to hide. Just a second. Barely anything. Yet I saw her whole face change. Not panic. Anticipation. A private current passing under calm water. She turned the phone face down and kept talking, but I had already caught it. The message preview had only shown a few words before the screen dimmed. Running late. Still want to. She kept speaking about quarterly targets like nothing had happened. I sat there listening, nodding in the right places, and realized I no longer needed a confession to know how deep this went. I needed something stronger. Something final. When we got home, Natalie went upstairs early, saying she had a headache. I stayed in the den with the lights low and the house quiet around me, reviewing everything one more time. Receipts, timestamps, parking records, calendar gaps, the dinner, the garage, the message preview. Each piece alone was deniable. Together, they formed a pattern so precise it felt almost mechanical. Then, just after 11, I heard her phone buzz from upstairs, followed by the soft creak of the guest room door, closing instead of our bedroom. That was new. I stood at the bottom of the staircase in the dark, looking up into the shadowed hallway, and understood that the next step could not be emotional. It had to be strategic. Because whatever was happening between Natalie and Jason was no longer living in stolen glances and suspicious timing. It had moved into routines, into confidence, into the kind of carelessness people only show when they believe they are untouchable. And people like that do not stop because you ask for the truth. They stop when the truth is waiting for them with nowhere left to run. The first real proof did not arrive with drama. It arrived on a gray Monday afternoon through something as ordinary as a printer tray. Natalie had left for work in a rush, distracted, her coffee half finished on the counter, and her laptop bag unzipped by the front door until she doubled back for it. She kissed the air near my cheek, said she had back-to-back meetings, and disappeared into the cold. By 10 o'clock, I was in the home office reviewing another week of receipts and calendar gaps when I noticed the wireless printer light blinking. A document had come through, but never fully printed. Just one page, curled awkwardly in the tray. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the hotel logo at the top. It was a reservation confirmation for a boutique property in River North, scheduled for the coming Thursday. Check-in at 5:30 in the afternoon, 1 room, 1 night, paid with a corporate card assigned to Natalie for client entertainment. No client name, no meeting reference, just a booking, neat and quiet and impossible to explain away. I stood there holding the page, listening to the hum of the machine, and felt something inside me go still. Not because I was surprised anymore, because now I had what I needed. Something dated, something concrete, something that existed outside instinct. I checked the timestamp on the printer history. 9:12 that morning. She must have sent it accidentally while printing something else from her laptop before leaving. A mistake. Small. Human. The kind of mistake people make only when they have grown too comfortable lying. I slipped the page into a folder, sat back down, and opened the shared cloud drive we had used for taxes and home records for years. Natalie had gotten sloppier there too. In a travel reimbursement folder, mixed between expense reports and presentation decks, were 2 image files she must have dragged over temporarily and forgotten to delete. The first was a valet receipt from the same hotel 3 weeks earlier. The second was worse. A screenshot of a text thread. Not the whole conversation, just enough to destroy the last fragile excuse my mind had been trying to preserve. Jason, Thursday works. Same place? Natalie, yes. He still thinks I am at leadership dinners. Then another line below that, sent a minute later. Natalie, do not text after 10. He is usually still awake. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, not because I needed clarity, but because pain has a way of asking to be verified. The room around me seemed to narrow. The walls, the desk, the muted winter light through the blinds. All of it drawing inward until there was only the screen and those words sitting there with the calm confidence of a secret that had lived too long in the dark. He still thinks. That was the line that stayed with me. Not because it was cruel, though it was. Because it revealed the full shape of her contempt. Natalie was not simply hiding something. She was narrating me inside the affair. Reducing me to a blind, harmless figure in the background of her private life. I printed the screenshot, then saved copies of everything onto a separate drive I kept locked in the bottom drawer of my desk. By noon, I had called a law office downtown and scheduled a consultation for Friday under my first and last name. No drama. No speeches. Just a calm woman on the phone asking whether 10:30 worked for me, and my own voice answering yes, as if I were booking a routine dental cleaning. That evening Natalie came home, carrying takeout from my favorite Italian place, smiling like she had done something thoughtful. "Long day," she said, setting the bag on the counter. I figured neither of us would want to cook. I looked at her hands, at the same fingers that had typed those messages, and realized the mask was not slipping at all. She believed in it completely. That made me dangerous to her in a way she still did not understand. Because I was no longer gathering clues to confirm a fear. I was building a case. And Thursday, the day she thought she was checking into that hotel unseen, was now the day I planned to learn exactly how far she was willing to go before the truth stepped out of the shadows and said her name. Thursday arrived with the kind of cold that made the city look sharper than usual. The sky over Chicago was flat and pale, the streets washed in winter light, everything clean and hard and merciless. Natalie left the house at 7:10 in the morning wearing a charcoal coat, knee-high boots, and the same composed expression she wore whenever she was preparing to lie for 12 hours straight. She paused at the door, turned back, and asked whether I would be home for dinner. There was something almost tender in the way she said it, and that was the final insult. I told her I had a late call with a vendor and might grab something on my own. She nodded, satisfied, and left with a quiet thank you, as if we were still two people living inside the same truth. By 9, I was in a law office on the 21st floor of a downtown building overlooking the river, sitting across from a divorce attorney named Elaine Mercer, who wore a navy blazer and the calm expression of someone who had spent years listening to people describe the exact moment their lives split in two. I handed her copies of the receipts, the hotel booking, the text screenshot, and the timeline I had built. She read without interrupting, flipping each page with controlled precision, then set the stack down and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You have more than enough to protect yourself," she said. "Not enough to punish. Not enough to erase. But enough to protect." The phrase settled into me like a steel beam. Elaine told me what mattered now was documentation, financial separation, and timing. Do not confront until assets are secured. Do not tip your hand. Do not argue facts with someone who has already rehearsed alternative versions of them. That last part stayed with me. Natalie had probably been editing reality for months. I was done auditioning for the role of confused husband in her private script. By late afternoon, I was parked half a block from the hotel in River North, engine off, collar turned up against the wind, watching the entrance through the blue-gray dusk. People moved in and out beneath the awning carrying leather bags, overnight cases, shopping totes, ordinary lives. At 5:26, Jason arrived first. Silver Audi, dark wool coat, no rush in his step. He handed his keys to the valet with the easy confidence of a man who had done this before. 4 minutes later, Natalie's SUV pulled up to the curb. She checked her reflection in the mirror before stepping out. I watched her smooth her hair, adjust the lapel of her coat, and smile at something on her phone before slipping it into her purse. She was not nervous. That was what burned. She was ready. Jason met her just inside the revolving door, and through the glass I saw them exchange a look so familiar, so warm, that it felt more intimate than anything dramatic ever could. No rush, no hesitation, no guilt, just two people stepping into a place they already belonged to. I took 3 photos from where I sat. One of Jason entering, one of Natalie at the curb, one of them crossing the lobby together beneath the chandelier light. Then I lowered the phone and leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes for a moment because the worst part had finally become undeniable. It was not fantasy anymore, not suspicion, not a husband building a case out of grief. It was a pattern with a door number and a check-in time. A real thing, a chosen thing. I left before they came back out. There was nothing else I needed to see. That night, Natalie came home just after 10:30 with the same controlled energy she always carried after these so-called leadership dinners. She smelled faintly of hotel soap and expensive perfume, the kind of detail most people would miss unless they had been paying attention for weeks. "You are still awake," she said softly from the doorway of the den, and I looked up from my laptop with a tired half-smile I no longer had to fake. "Long day," I said. "Same here," she answered. She stood there for another second, waiting, almost as if she expected me to reach for her, or ask how dinner went or offer her the normal mercy of being believed. Instead, I held her gaze just long enough to make the air shift. Not enough to alarm her, just enough to make something inside her hesitate. She recovered quickly, wished me good night, and disappeared upstairs. I listened to her footsteps fade across the hall and realized I had crossed an invisible line myself. I was no longer reacting to her betrayal. I was arranging the moment it would meet consequences. And for the first time since this began, the pain inside me was no longer the loudest thing in the room. Strategy was. 3 days later, Natalie mentioned the company winter mixer as casually as if she were asking whether we needed more paper towels. We were in the kitchen on Sunday afternoon. I was rinsing out a coffee mug. She was leaning against the island, scrolling through her phone, one ankle crossed over the other, perfectly composed. "It is this Thursday," she said. "Spouses are invited this time. You should come." I turned off the water and looked at her. For half a second, I almost admired the nerve it took to say that with a straight face. The same woman who had walked into a hotel with Jason 4 nights earlier was now inviting me into a room full of colleagues, lights, music, and catered appetizers, as if public appearances could bleach private betrayal clean. "Sure," I said. "I can make that work." She smiled without looking up. "Good," she said. "It will mean a lot." That sentence stayed with me all week. Not because it was true, because it was so carefully false. By then, Elaine had already helped me separate the accounts that mattered, document the shared assets, and prepare the first draft of what came next. I had copies of the hotel booking, the text screenshot, the valet receipt, the timeline, and the photos from outside the River North entrance. Everything was backed up twice. One folder at my office, one with Elaine. Nothing left on any device Natalie could access. I was done gathering. Now I was choosing the room where the truth would finally stand up. Thursday night arrived sharp and cold again. The kind of Chicago evening where your breath shows in the parking lot and every car door sounds louder than usual. The mixer was being held at a private event space near the river, all glass walls and string lights and polished concrete floors, trying very hard to look effortless. Natalie wore a black dress with long sleeves and simple gold earrings, understated in a way that made people look twice. She looked like success, like discipline, like someone who belonged exactly where she was. And when we walked in together, hand in hand for the first time in weeks, I could feel people noticing us. Not because we were remarkable, because they were checking whether the image still held. Natalie introduced me to people from operations, finance, vendor relations. She smiled. She laughed. She touched my arm once or twice with practiced warmth. Across the room, Jason stood near the bar in a fitted gray jacket, speaking to 2 younger associates with the relaxed posture of a man who thought the world was opening for him. When his eyes landed on Natalie, the expression flashed across his face so quickly most people would have missed it. Recognition, possession, then control. He looked away and took a sip of his drink. That tiny exchange told me everything. They believed they were safe even here. Especially here. Safety makes people sloppy. Around 8:20, a senior director tapped a spoon against a glass and welcomed everyone, thanking the team for a strong quarter. There was applause. More drinks. More chatter. A jazz trio in the corner drifting through something soft and forgettable. Natalie stood beside me, radiant and calm, and for one surreal moment I saw the entire structure of our marriage the way it had become. Polished from the outside, hollow in the center, still standing only because no one had kicked the right wall yet. Then Jason made the mistake that ended whatever illusion they had left. He approached us with a smile too confident by half, and said, "Natalie, you always know how to pull a room together." It was an ordinary compliment to anyone else. To me, it was a private signal said a little too warmly, a little too familiarly, in front of the wrong witness. Natalie answered with the kind of smile that lives in muscle memory. "That is part of the job," she said. I looked at him, then at her, and reached inside my coat for the sealed folder I had carried all night against my ribs. Not thick, not dramatic, just enough paper to collapse a lie. I placed it gently into Natalie's hands and spoke quietly enough that only the 3 of us could hear. "Go ahead," I said. "You should probably see what I already did." Her fingers tightened around the envelope. Jason stopped smiling, and in that single suspended second, before either of them moved, the room around us seemed to dim at the edges, as if the night itself knew something irreversible had just stepped into the light. Natalie looked down at the sealed folder as if it had suddenly gained weight in her hands. For the first time in months, maybe years, she did not have a prepared expression ready to save her. Jason glanced at the envelope, then at me, the confidence draining from his face in small, visible increments. Around us, the room kept moving for another few seconds. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed near the bar. The band kept playing. Then Natalie slid one finger beneath the flap and opened it. She saw the hotel reservation first. Her eyes moved once across the page, then stopped. Next came the valet receipt. The printed screenshot. The photos from the entrance in River North, time-stamped, clear, impossible to explain into something innocent. I watched her posture change before I saw her face fully break. It was subtle, shoulders tightening, breath catching. The tiny collapse of a person realizing the private story they built so carefully has just become evidence. "Ethan," she said, barely above a whisper, but I shook my head once. Not angry, not loud, just finished. Jason took a step back, then another, like distance itself might still protect him. It did not. He had already become what he truly was in that moment. Not the polished young professional with a fast smile and perfect timing, but a man standing too close to someone else's marriage with no script left to hide behind. Natalie lifted her eyes to mine, and I saw panic there now, sharp and unfiltered. "Please," she said softly, "do not do this here." That almost made me smile, not because any of it was funny, but because it was the first honest sentence she had given me in weeks. She was finally afraid of the room, afraid of witnesses, afraid of consequence. I leaned in just enough to keep my voice private. "I am not doing anything," I told her. "I am just no longer helping you pretend." Then I placed a second envelope on top of the first. This one was thinner, cleaner, her name written across the front in black ink. She stared at it for half a second before understanding caught up with her. Legal documents. Initial filings. Instructions to contact my attorney. The beginning of the end, typed neatly on expensive paper. Her face lost all color. She looked down at the pages, then back at me like she was searching for the husband who would still soften, still hesitate, still care more about preserving her comfort than protecting his own dignity. That man was gone. Not destroyed. Not broken. Just gone. Behind us, I noticed conversations starting to falter. A few nearby colleagues had caught enough of the silence to sense that something had shifted. No one needed a speech. No one needed a scene. Truth has its own temperature. People feel it when it enters a room. Jason muttered something about giving us a minute, but neither of us answered him. He moved away quickly, disappearing into the crowd with the speed of someone who suddenly understands his own name does not belong in this story publicly. Natalie's fingers trembled against the folder. "You should have talked to me," she said. And there it was, the final insult dressed up as reason. As if conversation had been the missing ingredient. As if honesty had ever failed because I did not request it gently enough. I looked at her for a long moment, at the woman I had loved, trusted, defended, and built a life beside, and I felt something strange settle over me. Not triumph. Not rage. Relief. Pure and quiet. The kind that comes when confusion finally dies. "I did talk to you," I said. "For months. You just needed me not to understand the answers." Her eyes filled, but even then I could not tell whether the grief was for me, for herself, or simply for the life that had just stopped obeying her. It no longer mattered. I stepped back, buttoned my coat, and glanced once around the room, at the warm lights, the polished glasses, the careful corporate smiles beginning to crack under curiosity. Then I looked at Natalie one last time. "The house keys are on the kitchen hook," I said. "Take what you need tonight. My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow." She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, maybe to beg for a version of mercy she had not offered me once through any of this, but I did not stay to hear it. I turned and walked toward the exit, each step steady, each breath easier than the one before. Outside, the cold hit clean and hard. The river wind cut through the street, sharp enough to wake the dead parts of a man back into himself. I stood on the sidewalk for a second beneath the city lights, listening to the muffled music behind the glass, and realized the silence inside me was not emptiness. It was space. Space where humiliation had been. Space where doubt had lived. Space where her lies had once sat like furniture in every room of my life. My phone began vibrating in my pocket before I even reached the car. Once, twice, 3 times. I did not look. I already knew who it was. I already knew what she wanted. Answers. Another chance. A way to slow the collapse. I opened the driver's side door, slid behind the wheel, and let the phone keep ringing in the dark. Then I started the engine, pulled away from the curb, and left her standing inside that bright glass room with the truth in her hands and no one left to hide from.